And students, I hope you all are well. Today again we will discuss the same chapter, Tribals, Dikus and the Vision of a Golden Age. In our previous module, we discussed about one man, Birsa, who belonged to a tribal group, and then we have understood the tribal customs and practices. We went through the jhum cultivators, hunter gatherers, herders, and even we understood the calendar, the tribal calendar also. Then we discussed about the settled cultivation. Now in this module we will talk about the colonial rule and the effect of colonial rule in the tribal lives. You can see in that map that the tribals were segregated, or even they were around the whole country. Bagas were settled in the central India, where you can see Van Gujars in near the Punjab and the northern area, and somewhere in northwest also you can see. Then Banjara, Pahara, Santals and so on. So now we will see the effect of colonial rule. The lives of tribal groups changed during the British rule. Before the arrival of the British, in many areas the tribal chiefs were important people. They enjoyed a certain amount of economic power and had the right to administer and control their territories. Even in some places they had their own police and decided on the local rules of the land and forest management. But under the British rule, the functions and the powers of tribal chiefs changed considerably. They were allowed to keep their land titles over a cluster of villages and rent out lands. But they lost much of their administrative power and were forced to follow the laws made by the British officials in India. They also had to pay tribute to the British and discipline the tribal groups on behalf of the British. They lost the authority which they have already, or which they have earlier enjoyed amongst the people, and they were unable to fulfill their traditional practices. One more thing here which is noticeable about shifting cultivators, that British were uncomfortable with the group who moved about and did not have a fixed home. They want tribal groups to settle down and become peasant cultivators. Why? There is a question, because the tribal who move around in the different places, for the Britishers it was difficult to pay, or it was difficult to collect the revenue. Those tribals will not pay the revenue because wherever they will search on. But for the settled peasants it was easier to control in the comparison of the tribals who were on the move. The British also wanted a regular revenue sources for the state. So they introduced land settlement. And what is that land settlement? That they measured the land, defined the rights of each individual of the land, and fixed the revenue demand for the state. Some peasants were declared as landowners and others were tenants. And the tenants were forced to pay the rent. Definitely they will have to pay the rent to the landowners, and who in turn that amount will be paid as the revenue of the state. The British effort to settle down jhum cultivators was not successful, because they found that settled plough cultivation was not easy in areas where water is scarce and soil is dry. So in fact, jhum cultivators who took to plough cultivation often suffered, and since their fields did not produce good yields, so the jhum cultivators in the northeast India insisted on continuing their traditional practice. And facing that widespread protest, the Britishers had to ultimately allow them to the right to carry on shifting cultivation in some parts of the forest. Now we will understand the impact of the forest law. There were several forest laws which were imposed on the tribals, as the life of the tribal groups was directly connected to the forest. So changes in the forest laws had a considerable effect on the tribal lives. And what was those laws? The British extended their control over all forest and declared that forests were state property. And some forests were classified as reserved forest, for they produced timber which British wanted. In these forests, people were not allowed to move freely. Practice jhum cultivation, collecting fruits or hunting animals were not allowed. So the question was, how were jhum cultivators to survive in this situation? Many were therefore forced to move out. They had to move to other areas in search of work and livelihood, and their condition became so pathetic. But soon British stopped the tribal people from living inside the forest, but soon they faced problem. Why? What was the reason? Because if they will throw out the people, the tribal people from the forest, from where would the forest department get its labor to cut trees and other works like railway sleepers or to transport the logs and all? So colonial officials came up with a solution, that they decided they would give jhum cultivators small patches of land in the forest and allow them to cultivate these on the condition that those who lived in the villages would have to provide labor to the forest department and look after the forest. So in many regions, the forest department stabilized forest villages to ensure a regular supply of cheap labor. One more thing is noticeable, beta. In 1930, as already we have seen in our previous module, that Warrior Elvin visited the land of the Vegas. He recorded many songs that lamented the hard times of the Vegas under the British rule, because their condition was so pathetic and means it was very hard for them to survive under their control. Now there were other problems also which took place, like many tribal groups reacted against colonial forest rule, because for how long they will survive and how long they will tolerate. They disobeyed the new rules, continued with practices that were declared illegal, and at times rose in open rebellion, such as the revolt of Songram Sangama in 1906 in Assam and the forest satyagraha in 1930s in the central provinces. So for today this much only we will go through. In our coming module we will discuss another topics. Thank you.